And good afternoon to all in the call, and welcome to today's webinar. But allow me to also then provide some background and highlights in terms of the work that we do in advancing timber in construction. So this is the short presentation that we have prepared for you as part of the opening remarks. And thanks, Ferdinand, for projecting this short presentation. We can go to the next slide, please. So about seven years ago, government and industry initiated a discussion to provide an understanding of the principles and importance of sustainable approach to building using timber in the construction industry. And that kind of work was also elevated and also adopted in the forestry sector master plan, which is also another government-led program or forum which aimed to support the forestry sector by ensuring that we achieve the investment target that has been set, but also then contribute towards job creation and also improve the sector's competitiveness. And the outcomes of those collaborations were to provide solutions to the green economy, reduce carbon emissions from buildings, and also diversify the product that the sawmilling sector is and was and is currently producing. And beside the contribution that the sector will have in terms of achieving our carbon emissions and also the international protocols that we've signed into in terms of carbon emission, the recent studies have also indicated that timber construction, and if we promote and move from where we are now, which is only 1% of the structures are built using timber, if we move a little bit to 5%, we can unlock a 1 billion industry, which will then have its own spin-offs and generate additional employment opportunities, which is what we currently need. But to get to that stage, we then have to bridge some gaps. There's some work that we need to do, which is part of the work that we are doing in collaboration with other industry players. We need to address the knowledge gap, and that is why then we have a lot of initiatives that talks to skills development, both for students and also the professionals in the industry. But then we also need to bridge the gap in terms of talking to those decision makers then that can help us in terms of the adoption of timber in the construction industry. So we need to stimulate demand for the use of this product in construction industry. But it doesn't end there. We also need to put our hands into research, and that is why the work that is done in the academia is very important for us to know the strength and the weaknesses of timber and how can we improve our work. By so doing, then we will ensure that widespread timber adoption in the construction sector in South Africa is achieved. But then one can ask, what is DTIC doing in construction and in this area? We are here because we want to partner with the academia, the industry, and all like-minded players to champion the use of timber as a reliable building material to drive industrialization and create jobs. Thereby, then we can support the upstream companies or upstream subsectors such as sawmilling, so that they can expand and improve their competitiveness. Next slide, Ferdinand. So in the past years, as I've mentioned, there's been some initiatives that we have been embarking on, and one of those is the Wood App, which is an educational platform for timber design and construction, which is the Wood App. It has been one of those initiatives that has got educational content, and members that are here on the call are encouraged to visit the Wood App and also take on some online courses that are there and available. But also this kind of webinars that we're presenting to you today are also available. The previous webinars are available in the Sawmilling SA website and its YouTube channel. You can also visit. Sam was also talking about the conference earlier on. The Growing Timber Connection website is a dedicated website that can give you all the information about our previous and also the upcoming timber construction conference, the colloquium, the timber design competition. And within the DTIC, in partnership with industry players, we also have the design finisher design competition, as well as the timber design competition, which are one of those initiatives which are there for us to raise and nurture design capabilities in South Africa and improve the design using wood. But we also have the social media groups, that is Facebook and LinkedIn. These are also one of those platforms where we try to reach as many people as possible in different groups of the society, and these groups are fed with reliable content about timber construction, and members also are encouraged to join and follow these LinkedIn groups. We have in the following slide have the links that are there for all these initiatives that I'm presenting to you now. You can follow, and we will share them also in the chat box, so you can also then follow the links there. So, Chair, without much time being wasted, let me thank you for this opportunity that you've also given to us. And also then I would like to welcome everyone, and let's make this webinar a productive and a successful one. Thank you, Sam.
I would like to introduce Richard Miller. He is a seasoned wood scientist and mechanical engineer with 2 decades of experience in timber processing, drying technologies, and wood product innovation. He's a lecturer at Nelson Mandela University, School of Natural Resources Management. He's been there since the year 2000, and he specializes in wood technology research and industry consultation. He holds a BSc in wood science, a Bachelor's of Engineering in Mechanical Engineering, and an MSc in Forestry from Stellenbosch University. He has a wide range of experience, and he will be talking on pole construction. Thank you, Richard, and over to you.
Super, right. Thanks, and very welcome. I've got quite a lot of things to say, although I'm going to move very quickly over that. Unfortunately, we have a limited time. And so I'm going to have a look at the wood properties and its characteristics. And it's very important for me that we have a look from first principles. If you understand the first principles, the application is so much easier. So I'm going to spend some time on the wood properties and the characteristics, because that is the first principles on which we base our trade. Very briefly on treatment, and then on specifications and the shelling of poles, and where there can be typical problems. Then have a look at a couple of pole types, and then very briefly on applications. I would like to spend more time on that, but I'm thinking it's better to focus on the core principles of things. Okay, if we look at the uses of poles, there's a big variation available, different lengths, different diameters, variation of wood species with its own characteristics, different preservative treatments, and then also the shape and surface finish, which is more into the construction side on poles, a very handy thing to use. Typical uses, fencing poles and droppers. It's not only used, it's a huge industry on the agricultural fencing, and it is also grouped together with fencing is structural poles, and on which I will elaborate quite broadly. But that's a major use of poles, extremely popular, extremely cheap to a degree. Then also telephone transmission poles, telephone poles less so with cell phone technology. Transmission poles also less used, although there's big areas in Africa and the Mid East where it's still in much use. Then roofing in thatched roofs, pole structures being used there very commonly. Otherwise, poles not so much in roof construction. Sometimes in barns on farms that you can also see that. Yeah, again, other pole constructions. The nice thing on the pole constructions that we have is also that we can use curved members naturally growing in the outside on a sustainable basis, and we can use it for various structures. And the beauty of that is that, let's call it the old schoolness of that. It is like watches. It is still popular to have the old analog watches with the two indicators compared to the digital watches. And it's just as if people always like to go back to traditional things of poles, beams, and also the use of stone. So if you look at the popularity, very nice strength to mass ratio that we have with poles. So the transport of that is of a big advantage. Then I'll refer often to that during the talk, is the good moment of inertia that we get with that. And when we're looking at the strength values of poles, it is great. And the reason for that good moment of inertia is the symmetry that we have. So if whenever it is bent, it stays in a straight line. It doesn't get warped when it bends. Also, it doesn't matter in which direction you bend it, it will be similar. So it's so much more, it's so much easier to predict what's going to happen. The composition around the perimeter is on the perimeter of the tree or the pole is where we get the least knots. We could get nice high density timber on the mature wood, and I'm going to refer to that again. Environmental aspects, it's a sustainable resource. You can use it in sensitive areas. If you look at dunes, if you look at wetlands, it's easy to use there. It is fast erection that you have of structures there. And then it's a nice niche market for the forestry industry that cannot always market their thinnings and the treetops, where it can be used very nicely on poles. The big issue is, as with timber, there's a strength variation and also durability issues because it's typically used in ground contact. So if you look at the pole requirements, your SAN specifications refer to strength, species, the geometry of the poles, whether it's tapered or straight or cylindrical, and then whether there's preservative treatments possible. It's not always the case. And then we will also accept certain defects like spirality, crook, knots, and splits. All of that is being in the SAN specifications, and I'll get later to that. Maybe just a quick thing, if people are not familiar with that, we use the term hardwood and softwood, and it's not always that being hard. It's usually hard, but it's not necessarily hard. So hardwood more refers to how it grows. It's got flowers, it's got seeds, broadleaves, and the Afrikaans term there is called loofhout, which is much more descriptive, or a leafwood. The Germans also use that. In terms of poles, it's pretty much what you get with the gum poles. Also, wattle poles are available, although it's not deemed for structural purposes. And then your softwoods, consisting out of needles or naalhout in Afrikaans, and the typical pine. So if we look at the South African conditions, gum being your hardwoods and pine being your softwoods. If we look at the distribution of the sapwood and the hardwood, your sapwood is just that outer ring that we get on the tree. That is the living part of the wood. It transports water. Importantly, it also stores sugars and starches. So that is stuff that's getting attacked by insects. Luckily, it's very permeable. So in terms of the preservation of a pole, this is key. This is the thing that we need. Unfortunately, it's limited in your hardwoods like gum, that there's a limited thickness of the sapwood. So it's not always that you can do all funny kinds of things on your hardwoods, because in the process of doing that, you remove some of the sapwood. If you look at the hardwood, it is deadwood. It's impermeable. Luckily, it's durable due to the extractives that's in the timber, and also close up for any water ingress to a degree by having closed pits, and your cell walls are getting blocked, or the cell openings and the pit openings between the cells getting blocked in. Not to be confused with juvenile wood and mature wood, which I will get to now, but just a sapwood, which is just like a sheath going around the timber just underneath the bark. Other wood properties that is important for us on poles is the spirality. So it's just as the grain or the cells that is being deposited in a spiral configuration. The problem with that is warping, that we can easily get that in your poles, and whenever you've got the compression stresses in the timber, you can have buckling due to the slenderness of poles. Luckily, it is more in the juvenile wood, so we will get that. Although you can get it in mature trees like this example that we have here, but it's more reserved to the juvenile wood. Now, with the juvenile wood spirality, so your cells are deposited at an angle and not straight like your mature wood. And also another important thing is your microfibril angle in the majority of your cell wall layers are not deposited straight, but at an angle. So this double whammy of spiral grain together with your microfibril angle will have shrinkage in length, and that's a big issue if we're looking at poles, especially if you remove some parts of the poles, then it will be then we will have crookedness. Also, around your juvenile wood, we've got low density timber. You've got the knots or a knotted core a lot of times are reserved to more or less the juvenile wood. But it's luckily to the core, and that's bringing us again back to the moment of inertia, where having your best wood on the outside and having a much better strength of your pole. If we look at knots, quite in your pines, you often find that there's knot whorls, so that a lot of branches directed out on the same horizontal height. And if you look in this pole, there's the evidence of all the different branches branching off on the same height. Again, with our moment of inertia, it is restricted to the core. Loose knots, tight knots, it's got the similar issue, although your loose knot is just where the branch is dying off and you get overgrowth. It can fall out, and that is in terms of poles, that it can leave a stub hole. That's the only issue that we really have on poles. Around the knot, there's grain distortion affecting the strength and the stiffness. The knot whorl spoke about that. And then there's more or less the same volume of the knot. You've got an associated volume of reaction wood right next to that. So it's not only the knot itself that will affect the timber strength, but also the reaction wood around that. Branch angles, a small branch angle will have a bigger effect on the strength. Issues being the resin that exudes in pine knots, the surface roughness, and as I've said, a good moment of inertia that we still get out of it because it's been restricted to the core. In terms of reaction wood, that's leaning tree stems or upper side of branches, And that's the issue why we cannot use branch wood for poles because of the low strength due to the reaction wood. Funny enough, hardwood form tension wood, which is on the upper side of the lean, and your softwood forms compression wood, which is on the lower side of the lean. The effect of that, grain distortions, strength and stiffness on that. Okay, sorry, I discussed that. Sorry, there was a double whammy. In terms of the wood properties, still on the compression wood, typical you get to an off-center pit, oval shape, eccentric growth rings, and it is, you can recognize it by the dull appearance and the high proportion of late wood that you have there. Sometimes in some pine species, it is normal straight trees that still have compression wood, and then it is indicated by these rings around the timber, although it's pretty much spread out. You recognize it when there's a breakage. You've got this abrupt, brash, brittle failure in the timber. Effect on poles, strength and stiffness is is affected, and the shock resistance is very much brought down, reduced, and some warp that you have there on the moisture content changes. Another property that we're looking at is growth stresses that we find more in your gum, and that is just tension stresses on the outside of the pole and compression stresses on the inside. And the moment that you cut that or transport it and you've got shocks on it, it tends to break up like that. Result of that is hard cracks, shakes and splits. If we look on the gum poles that's been used for fencing and structural purposes, it needs an anti-splitting nail plate according to our NS specifications, and that is sorry if you use it with CCA. Creosote, it is not necessary. So that's what you see, splitting, and it's very common that you find that in your hardwoods, especially on your gums. And split plates in use there, even though it didn't help with the splitting that we have on this pole. Also, a brittle art that you get in the core due to the high compression stresses, again, is restricted to the core and it's less of an influence. And also, when you kiln dry gum, you often find that you get cell collapse that is cracking up on the inside of the pole. Luckily, you can see here on the outside of the pole, it is intact. Okay, what I've mentioned. In terms of the specifications, I'm not going to run through them all, but there's all of these specifications available: building fencing poles, utility poles, the preservation of that, and then some building codes that's also including timber poles. If we look at the treatment and preservatives, it's been covered by Professor Tim Rapstra on a previous talk. It is available on the on this platform, also on the Wood app that it is available. So I'm not going to go much into that. We do the preservation according to hazardous classes. If I can briefly just go over H2, which is not in ground contact on the roof. H3 has a classification that is outside in the rain, but not in ground contact. And then H4 that is in ground contact. H5 fresh water, and H6 seawater exposure. On the treatment specification according to the hazardous class, and the two main things that I want to indicate to you is to the preservative retention. That means in the terms of the kilograms of preservatives absorbed per cubic meter of timber, and then the depth of penetration. Those two things determine to a big degree in which hazardous classifications we can treat it. So treatment to a certain hazardous classification stipulate the retention and the penetration. And then other things like whether it's hardwood and softwood, hardwood, sapwood, and the type of preservative. This is just a very simplified table of what you can expect I would rather suggest refer to SANS 1288. That's got much better application of this and information available. But it is, yeah, it's just a general thing. If we look at the pole types, plinths, and here we've got an issue. Because of a plinth removing some of the sapwood, we do not have the necessary sapwood always available, and therefore you cannot treat it as a structural pole in terms of the preservatives, although the strength can make it. I'm going to refer later to that. If you look at your pole types, 457, it's a softwood, and it's only certain species of softwood that can be used for a building and fencing pole because of the minimal characteristic strength. The other species, you can still treat it, but then it cannot be classified as a structural pole. Sorry. Yes, right. And then in your hardwoods, agricultural structural poles being denoted with an additional acronym, structural, or for vineyards, fencing, droppers, and guardrail posts, although we will focus more on the structural stuff here. Only gums, mostly Eucalyptus grandis, and not wattle at all. Utility poles, it is in a different specification, it is stronger, and it's got different grading rules. Split poles, not seen as structural poles, and therefore refer only to SANS 1288 for that. If we look at the strength and stiffness, if you compare that to your pine lumber being 5th percentile strength between 5 and 10 megapascals, you see that we're sitting here with an animal that can take much more. And that is the beauty of poles and its use, that it is so much stronger. And we can accommodate different defects, all being in there that I've referred to previously. Now, very important that we do not get confused with the SANS 457 and SANS 1288. Both of them can be used to manufacture treated poles. The problem with SANS 457s, it's limited to a certain amount of species as well as structural in terms of straightness and so on. If you want to treat timber which does not comply to the physical strength, you can still do that, but then under a SANS 1288. So it's 1288 is considered as non-structural, should be used as structural poles. Building, agriculture poles, all of these other poles are will be covered under SANS 457, which includes not only the preservation, but also the strength of that. So it's allowed to encourage treated pole use in line, that is not in line with 457, ranch style outdoor furniture. If you have a crooked pole or a curved pole that, for example, you want to use as a lintel, it is available. You can do that, and you can give the proof that it is well preserved under the SANS 1288. And that is the big thing. What happened, unfortunately, we had some timber getting into the market as 1288. It was marked as 1288, and it was sold as structural poles. So just be aware of the two differences. Okay. Selling of the poles. Sometimes people prefer it treated in the shape and the size to be used. Important there is the complete envelope of the sapwood needs to be treated. If it's square posts, a large amount of sapwood must be still available, and you can only do that with softwoods. And majority of the time is on H3 out of ground contact. Poles classified according to the top in diameter, and there's various lengths that you can get. Just note on your pine and your gum, the diameter isn't always in the same classes. So just take note of that and the different lengths that we have available. The majority in multiples of 0.3 meters, although you get some others in between. The marking of that, as I've said, on the minimum diameter at the top end of the pole, a plant identifier, the quality mark, the standard, the SAN standard, hazardous class, the year of manufacture. So it's typical 25 millimeter metal tags, or you can put it on the anti-split plates that you can have that. All the poles, all of them, each pole must be marked, lats and droppers, only one in a bundle, or if it's loose lats, more than 10% of the lats. Right, then in terms of the geometry of the poles, gum and wattle is getting debarked by hand, majority of the time, pine with a ring debarker, although you can, instead of debarking, you can do peeling, or you can do rounding. Peeled poles are still tapered, but it's got an even diameter. You can have sweep, you can have crook, if it's within the specifications. It's just a pole that spins around and lightly held in place between wheels, like that. So there you can still see the bark on, and we get a much smoother surface, although it can have the taper as well as some crookedness. If you look at the rounded pole, it is weaker. It is deemed as non-load bearing or non-structural pole. It is straight, it's cylindrical, it looks beautiful. It's got a smooth surface. You can take it out on a date. That is how good it looks, although it is non-structural. And in the manufactured, it's just a set of pulleys, grooved pulleys, held in place, push along the straight line, and we get a very smooth and cylindrical straight pole out of that. And this is the issue. Limited amount of sapwood that we have with that. Also, you've got an asymmetric pole with different properties on the one side and on the other side, and warp is, you're looking for warp on that. These others, perfect poles, but we have that issue. And you can see that as well. Best practices, do all the cutting, all the machining on the pole first, and then do the treatment. It's not always possible. Then you can have a sealer, Tanalise EcoSeal. They sell it that you can have exposed surfaces that you spray on, or easier is to just heat creosote and paint it on the end grain. The penetration on the end grain is pretty good with creosote. Then lastly, maybe getting a little bit into structures, pole planting techniques. The big thing is don't make a cup. So either have the pole and use a collar of concrete around it, or have just a precast concrete footing and put some backfill around it. Structural design, notches. The big problem is that we've got round things with a limited surface. So notches, it's common to use that. Fasteners, use nuts and bolts. I think Barry is also going to refer back to that. Big washers, and you also get special brackets. If I can just very briefly run through this, some notches so that we can have a flat surface that intersect with that, or interface. So if you make that, watch out, don't take too much away from the sapwood, and then also just add creosote or this EcoSeal. Creosote, heat it up, and then paint it on. And there's some more examples. This is very common to use it like that. And then tooth plates, split rings, spike grid connectors that limit the movement between the pole and the plank. Steel bracing straps, very common to use. And then flitch plate connectors that you can put into the poles. also kind of like a truss hanger that is available, and then also ridge joints that you can use. Right, sorry, to conclude, just be aware of the variation in structural and durability properties, and that is why we go to the first principle, so that we can make things simplify for us. And then lastly, poles that offer a very unique construction solution to utilize a sustainable resource. And that's it. Thanks a lot.
Our next speaker is Barry Miller. He is a forestry and wood processing specialist with over 30 years of experience spanning sawmilling, management, timber processing, and vocational education. He holds a BSc in forestry from Stellenbosch University and a master's in technology for forestry from Nelson Mandela University. He has also served as a lecturer in wood technology since 2005. Again, he is also someone with an extensive experience, hands-on experience in both plantation and sawmilling operations. And today his topic is all about timber decking. So over to you, Barry. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Samantha. So very kind words. And like Richard said, humbled to be in such a big audience. So sorry to listen to me. I hope you didn't have a big lunch, or else you'll start falling asleep. So I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. So well-constructed timber deck is a valuable asset to a building. It joins the indoor and outdoor spaces. It's a relatively simple construction technique, although we just need to look at some of the basic principles to make sure that it is strong enough and that it will last long enough. So we'll just be looking at timber as a construction material, legality, design, setting of a deck, foundation structure, decking boards, railings, and ceiling. And just to kick off, I think timber is a fantastic building material. I love timber. I'm passionate about it. And I've built a few decks and houses of timber in my life and really enjoyed working with this thing. It's lightweight, easy to machine, strong, available, renewable, and now as well it's recyclable. So it's been used for centuries successfully. And but like all other building material, it's got its limitations, and we need to also consider that. It's biodegradable, and there's also quite a large variation in its characteristics. In durability, because it's natural, it will also degrade, so it will suffer from biological and also weathering. And some of the timbers are natural durable, and some are not so natural durable, so we just need to understand that as well. Fantastic example of a 800-year-old building still standing today made out of timber in Norway. So that's most probably due to design detailing and weathering and maintenance, and also durable timber. The other example, I must say, that was my first deck that I've built in my life, and after 5 years I revisited the site, and I was dismayed to see it's falling apart. Just because I didn't use treated decking, so I didn't know better at that stage. So hopefully you won't fall into this pitfall. Here's a deck, 10 years old, also pine, but this is treated CCA. So the deck is standing here on our campus, still looking beautiful. So just watch out for non-durable timbers. There is a possibility to treat it and make it durable. So Richard alluded to this as well, and on the Wood app, there's a whole section on timber preservation. So on our timber decking, make sure that if it's non-durable timber, that it is treated to H3 application for outside use. And the poles and post structures must be at least H4 treated for ground contact. If it's in water, you need to go H5 and C in H6. But for a normal decking, H4 should be suffice. That there's a stamp on the timber that proves that it is correctly treated. In this case, you can see that it's H3 CCA, and that is what you'll need for decking material. Timber is versatile, especially our South African pine, and on this histogram, you can see the strength varies tremendously, and our mean is about 36, and we grade about till grade 5 and 7. It's because of safety factors and 5th percentile stuff. But the good news is for engineers is that you can use our timber with confidence. We got a robust grading system, and we use a SANS 1783 specs on that. And we mark the timber, as you can see on top. That was S5 finger joints from MTO. So make sure you use marked graded timber if you want to build a deck. Timber also shrinks and swells, so we need to build that into our design. So building science, this is, I think, just such a cool graph where they looked at moisture uptake with relative humidity, and it seems like in this case that's spruce here, but it's a solid wood that the most of all the building material. So we do have a building material that sucks up water from the atmosphere and then dries out again, and with that it will cause shrinkage and expansions. This table, this map from South Africa shows you the equilibrium moisture content zone. So that is the wetter and dry parts in South Africa. So if you plonk wood somewhere in South Africa, what will happen is the wood will eventually end up on the moisture content, the equilibrium moisture content in the area. So yeah, Cape Town, George, PE, it's 150 grams per cubic meter. So that's about 15% moisture content. That's the wettest parts in South Africa. And the driest there is about Uppington, Keetmanshoop of 6% moisture content. So if you buy decking material from the Cape area and you transport it there to inland, you need to understand that that stuff is going to dry, and if it dries, it will shrink, and if it's not properly stacked, it will warp as well. So just make sure you stack and dry the timber properly when you get it from wetter zones. So we do kiln drying a lot of our timber, so you can sometimes spec lower timber, but in high commercial sawmills, they don't have always the ability to do that. CCA treatment is a waterborne treatment, and it basically fills up your wood with water again after drying. So you sort of have to re-dry the timber after if you buy freshly treated CCA timber. So just make sure that you know that. On the legality of decks, it is the local authority needs to approve a deck structure. There are some controversies because in the SANS 10400, it can be seen as a minor building work, and then in the opinion of the building control officer, it's not necessary to submit plans. But best is to contact your local authority, and I think on liability issues, I would recommend the engineer sign off your design. And you will use certain SANS codes like the SANS 182, 10163, the SANS 10043, and 10400J. If we just look at the design of a deck, you need to check out the purpose of the deck. If it's a low or high commercial deck, consider some design elements. You'll quickly look at going through drawings, determining space and spans, and then end up with a bill of materials. I love SketchUp. It's a fantastic program. I think there's most probably other programs available as well. I teach this to my students as well, and it's an easy to learn program, and fantastic for initial design sketches, and you can quickly see what elements you most probably need, or what planning you'll need to put in place. So just a normal deck plain deck normally has these 4 elements, and it's got like a post, a beam or a bearer, a joist, and then decking boards to that. So spacing and spans, terms we use in decking construction. So you need to know these. Spacing is the distance between 2 consecutive members, and span is the distance that a member can breach between 2 supports. And normally the one bottom member determines the other member. So the spacing of the bottom member determines the span of the next member. So here we can see beam spacing. So it's the distance between 2 consecutive members. That becomes the span of the joist. So the joist spans from beam to beam. In similar way, the spacing of the joist becomes the span of the floorboard. So that will be important if you start designing a deck to understand that. In this case, the post spacing becomes the beam span. Okay, so if we got a floorboard or decking board of 22.5 millimeter, it can span 450 millimeters. So there's a rule of thumb that says deck board thickness times 20 is the span. So it would revert to a joist spacing of 450, and then if we check the tables and choose a joist, we can see the beam spacing will be 3.5. So this table comes out of 10400J. If we look at the grade 8, our spacing of 450, and we choose a joist of 50 by 152 millimeters, the maximum span there can be 3.5 meters. So these tables come in handy when you start designing a deck to look at safe spans. So otherwise the deck will become too bouncy or it can creep too much. Okay, bill of materials. This is another exercise I did with my students, quite interesting. We gave them a project on to determine which joist choice will be the best, because you can have different choices of joist, and that will influence your spans, your spacings, and the amount of material that you'll need. So in this case, we had a 114, a 152, and a 228 joists, and we did some calculations, and we had some prices connected to that, and we see that there's different prices for the deck, just the members, not the installation, just the members. And the one is what, 14,000. Another one was about almost 15,800. So if you want to work out bill of quantities, this is quite a cool tool to use. In the construction phase, it's good to set out the deck height. So start at the top and work your way down. So you start at where you want to finish. And then you start taking levels down. So there's many types of levels. You can use a spirit level or a dumpy, even a pipe level. Just make sure the levels are calibrated. I've put in many things, and due to large frustration, found out that the level wasn't calibrated anymore. So this normal level, just flick it around and make sure the bubble is still on the same space. If the bubble moves from one side to the other side, when you rotate that, the level is not accurate anymore, so throw it away. Example of this was a deck builder that I visited, and he started at the finished floor level height of the door. He definitely wanted the door not to get stuck on the deck, so the deck was about 15 millimeters lower than a finished door. And from there on, he did his calculations down joist, beams, and footings of your post eventually. So just on levels, there's some different ways to fix a joist to a beam, and that can influence your levels. On the left-hand side, you can see the joist is inside the beam. So if you want a low-level deck or you've got limited height, that is a way to go. If you don't have, easy way is just put the joist on top of the beam. Just note it will increase the total deck height a bit. The squareness of the deck, if you're building a square or rectangular deck, if you build square, it's just much easier with everything. So just make sure the posts are square. You can do this technique just to measure the diagonals, make sure they are correct. You can also use the Pythagoras 3-4-5 system. If you've got a line and you tie it out on different corners and you pull it tight, and the one is 5 meter, 4 meter, and 3 meter, you can have a a square corner, and you can align that to get reference lines for your deck. Foundation poles. So Richard talked a bit on poles. SANS codes talk about a pole of 100 millimeter minimum, or a bearing surface of 7500. So make sure the pole is plumb, and those poles that Richard want to take out on the date, they can plant very easy because they are cylindrical. The tapered poles, which are better, is more difficult to plant because they will have multiple sides to put your level on. So choose, let's say, the front or the right side, and keep with that side and forget about the rest. So pole specs, just watch out, softwoods and hardwoods. These specs are different in sizes, top in diameters. So if you, they fall in different categories, although the lengths are the same. Footing of the pole planting technique is most probably one of the most common ways to do that, is dig a hole about, depends what type of soil you have, from 600 to 1 meter in sandy soils. And then you put a footing at the base, and then you put your plant on your pole on that, and then you backfill it with some compactable material like a G7 material, and make sure you compact it every 150 millimeter. Yeah, you can see the foot on the footing. That is a serious footing there. It's a 600 by 600 by 80. And yeah, we can see the poles that have just been planted. The major advantage, immediately you can start with the rest of your structure. There's no concrete to wait to set and stuff like that. So the collar planting technique is just a pole, and what we do is we dig a hole about 600 deep, 300 in diameter, and we pour concrete in there. And but you first set your pole in, make sure the concrete is not at the bottom of the pole. So that is, you don't want to form a cup that holds water, and you'll find premature degrade of your pole. Obviously, you need some stakes to support that until the concrete fixes. Some builders like to put some spikes in the pole just to connect positively with the concrete. Post bracing. Normally, if you've got quite a high level deck, you need to brace your slender post. So this can easily be done, just putting a 45-degree angle member on it, connecting it to the top of the corner and to the base of the next post. So sometimes if you need to have that for parking lot and stuff like that, you need to go for a bigger pole, or you can brace your deck underneath the deck itself in a cross fashion, or supported against the building. There's other foundations also available. So we get this galvanized steel foundation. That's especially for square members. I think Richard also mentioned that you're not supposed to plant a square member in the soil. You need sapwood surrounding a member, treated sapwood. So for square members above ground, then you can use this system. For low decks, this is a Rika block system that we tested it last time at Stellenbosch on our course, with decking course. It worked quite nice. Or if you want a temporary deck, if you don't want to dig holes, or it's not possible to dig holes, this is a very nice system. And then the SANS codes also talks about normal plinths in terms of wall plinths from brick, and that you can build for floor joist. So that brings us to the bearers or the beams, and we need to fix that to the posts. And typical, these bearers are larger members, so like 2 to 8 50s, and they can span anything from 1.8 to 3 meters. And we fix them on different systems. The one is a metal hoop fixing technique, where you cut the post off level, and you put the beam on top of the post, and you use a typical metal hoop system, and you nail it in with cloud nails all along and across and over. And it's a sturdy connection, because you're not in shear. The beam is on the post in a positive way. If it's a slender beam, if it's like a 22838, you might need some more support, otherwise it tends to buckle. But if it's a 50 or 76, it's a sturdy connection and easy to build. Just make sure your posts are cut off exactly level, because you don't have an opportunity to level your beam. Okay, so we can also use a bolt-only connection. So it's a very easy one. If you don't have a big deck, it's easy just to drill a hole, put a 12mm bolt through that, and to put a nice washer on there. So they say washers increase the connector capacity by 25%. So we do have a problem with a round pole versus a flat surface. So our connection there isn't fantastic, especially when you got winged washers in there. It doesn't connect all the way. So the next one is a seated connection. So cut the seat into the post and then bolt it. So very strong and very common, most popular way to connect a bearer to a post, because you've got a compression of your beam on top of your post, and then you've got the bolts and two flat surfaces that you pull against each other. So that's a nice connection. The only issue might be if you cut that seat in too deep, you're exposing untreated timber. So you can retreat that face with hot creosote. Or if you cut it too deep either, you might not have a very strong connection because the lip won't be big enough. So just watch out. That seat is normally about 10 to 20mm. It doesn't have to be the entire width of the bearer. Right, sometimes we need longer beams, so we need to join the beam. So the correct way to join this beam is by having a scarf joint close to the post. So you have a beam that is connected to the post, like in the sketch, and then the scarf joint sitting on top, and then putting a gang nail plate on the sides, and screws in at 45 degrees that connects these two beams. So the joist sizes, we looked at joist sizes earlier on, and there are quite a few joist sizes available according to the table. So first of all, there's two grades in the table. There's a grade 5 and grade 7. Good luck for finding grade 7. They're not that available. It's quite difficult for sawmills to actually have the inventory of grade 7s just because of a number game of pieces. So, but you'll definitely get grade 5s are very available. So if you design a deck, try to stick to grade 5s just for availability. Not all of these timbers are also available in H3 applications. So if you build a deck, you might need to retreat H2 to H3 applications. But here's your joist spacing. So this table has got two joist spacings, so 450 and a 600mm spacings. So just note your deck board need to span 450 for this table to work. So that will revert to a 22.5mm thickness and a 30mm thickness of board for these spacings. So this is the spans they give you in meters. So we can see here the shortest span is from a 38.152 on a 600 spacing. It can span 2.7 meters, and the largest span is 6.5 meters on a 76.228. So that is a monster of a joist, I can tell you, and it's grade 7. So good luck for finding one like that. So a very common joist is a 15250, just because it's available in H3 application, and also a 50mm is quite nice to nail your joist on, your floorboard on, to join it on your floorboard. Join your floorboard on the joist. Sorry for that. There's alternative span tables. They come out of a different SANS codes, and there's some controversy on this. So SANS 10.800 talks about that, and they got joists starting already at a 7638, also going to a 22876. They got one for domestic use and one for commercial use. And if you can see here, they got different load design loads. So for the domestic use, it's 1.5 kilonewton point load and 1.5 live load, while the commercial use is 5 kilonewton point and 2.5. So you'll see much shorter span capabilities on your commercial use. Okay, to fix a joist, there's basically a few ways, and that is 3 methods. One is with a truss hanger. So you can see truss hangers here. We wanted to have this deck quite low, so we didn't want to put the joist on top of the beam, so we sunk it in and then used truss hangers. It's a bit more work, but we wanted to keep this deck one step up. There's a deck we built that had a mixed design. It had needed to be low in front, and going down the slope we had space to work with, so we didn't need to work with joists. So we just put the joist on top of the beam. Note there's an overlap of 200 millimeter, so that's a correct way to lengthen a joist, is to overlap it. Yeah, we can see also that deck from the inside using truss hangers, just because we had a limitation on height for that deck. Yeah, we can see the bolted connection, seated bolted connection, using also oversized big washers. Okay, on joist stability, so SANS codes talk about every 2.4 meter you should bridge your joist, so it helps a lot for vibration and makes everything act as a unit. So just blocking it in makes a lot of sense. So just nailing it in from the sides and just stabilizing that slenderness of the joist as well, especially if it's a deep joist like a 228-38, they tend to buckle, so this will help for that as well. That brings us to decking boards. So there's quite a lot of different types of decking boards and different fixing techniques. So normally decking boards are can be is from non-structural graded timber. So it's not graded according to strength grading. It's graded according to aesthetic appeal. So they look at knots and resin and stuff like that. And they normally plane it all around, so it is a planed material to make it even thickness. And then sometimes they will do an arras on it or a bullnose to make it round so it doesn't hurt your feet. Or they can put grooves in there, reeded stuff or anti-slipping stuff. And then side grooves for tips. So we'll talk about that later on. Some guys put anti-cupping slots underneath the deck so that it doesn't buckle or cup to one side. Okay, so hardwood and softwood decking boards is the choice you must probably have if you put on a deck. So softwood boards are pine treated in South Africa. It's readily available. You can get it in all kinds of lengths and a few widths and a few thicknesses. So it's a nice choice. It's easy to install, and if it's treated properly and you sealed it properly, it will last a lifetime. So here's a freshly installed CCA proper treated pine decking boards. And we used nails to install this, and it turned out actually quite nice. Hardwoods, so there's some imported hardwoods and some local hardwoods. So hardwoods are nice. It forms a very strong deck. It's a harder material and stronger than pine, so your deck becomes also harder and feel more stable on the same spans. Some of these hardwoods are natural durable timber, so you don't have to seal it. You can leave it and let it gray. Some of them, if you let it gray, it forms splinters and it will put some splinters in your feet. So just make sure you use the correct one. And some of these hardwood ones that are not treated, you sometimes have sapwood in it and you can't see that. it's very difficult to distinguish sapwood and hardwood. And then in a few years' time, you'll see some of the wood being eaten by insects or it gets rotten. So you do have that risk if you use hardwoods and you got some sapwood in there that is non-durable. Otherwise, some twisting, end splitting, and cracking is and difficult to install. So hardwood decks are superior, but the installation is going to be a bit more difficult. It's more expensive, and you can't get all of the lengths always available. There's a Grappa hardwood deck, reeded hardwood deck that was sealed, but now just left to grey. So it's quite a durable piece of timber. And so Balao is also a very common one. It's a Shorea species, same species as Marantis. Then there's Ipi from Central Americas and Masaranduba, which seems to be, according to some deck guys, one of the top class decking boards that they can find, which is very durable, very hard. And according to FSC, the thing sinks in water. It's got a specific moisture or density higher than water. So hard animal. We get some locally grown eucalyptus species, Carigum, Cladocalyx, and Seligna. Of the Cladocalyx might be the superior one, and then Cari after that, and then Seligna and Grandis. Just watch out for the sapwood on those. They are non-durable, so you need to have the hardwood in those Selignas. Okay, fixing of deck boards. We can screw them, we can nail them, or we can clip them, where nailing is a very economical way, using a ring shank nail. So the nice thing about that, the installation is quick, especially on a pine. It seals off, the head seals off nice. It doesn't make a water trap. The problem with this thing, if you want to get it out, you're going to break the board. And if you don't install it properly, here's some few pictures of a hard hammer blow indented the deck, making it look ugly. And sometimes these nails start to pop. So as the timber expands and shrinks over time, it pulls out the nail, believe it or not. Okay, screws by far the most popular system. And there's many different screws available. On the left-hand side, we've got a stainless steel screw. It's got a nice cutter in front, so it pre-cuts its own hole. It doesn't have fluting underneath the head of this one. So you're going to have to pre-drill and shrink the head in, countersink the head in. Otherwise, you could turn this head off in hardwood. So stainless steel is not that good in torque. It's actually quite brittle, so just watch out for that. And then we can get this new copper colored decking screw, which seemed to be quite nice, easy to install. It's got this square head in it. There's a positive grip onto it, a very small head, and it's got a pre-cutter. You can't see it on this, but very easy to install. And then you get the specialized deck screws. They go for about R2 a screw. They're the Rolls-Royce of screws. I think Rotoblas, Specs make these type of screw systems. You're going to pay for that, but for high-end clients, I think this is definitely a way to go. And then chipboard screws will last you most probably about 4 years, and they will rust off. Especially in CCA-treated timber, the chemical reaction between the copper and chrome, and this passivated galvanizing won't last very long. Okay, and then we get this skew nailing of edge screwing of decking boards, not to have this unsightly decking screws on top. So it is an option. It can break out quite easy, so it is a possibility. Then decking clips. Decking clips is some newer developments, and there's many different types of decking clip. There's metal ones and aluminium ones and plastic ones. And the nice thing about the decking clip is that you don't have screws on the surface top. So That is major advantages. And you've got predetermined spacings, so all of the boards are nicely spaced. And the disadvantage of that, if the boards try to twist, the decking clip doesn't seem to hold it properly, and it either tears out the width or the decking clip bends. And some of these decking clips are difficult to get out. You have to take out the whole deck from one side to get to a board when you replace. Other decking clips that is of plastic, you can just cut off again, so it's easy to get the board out. But some guys have had problems both in hardwoods and softwoods in tearing out of that side groove. So just laying out of deck boards. If your deck boards you need long deck and your deck boards aren't long enough and you need to join, try to stagger the joints so that they're not all on one place. Have a proper gap management system, so a spacer to have a gap that's not too big, not too small. If it's too small, it might expand. If it's wet, it will close the gap and you'll have water damming up, which you don't want. If it's too big, then stuff will fall through the deck that you don't want to. Just look at the edge distances for nailing is important. So make sure you adhere. If you put it too close to the edge, it will break out. You want it as far as possible to the edge for leverage. So just make sure you are adhering to the edge distances. If you're working with wide decking boards and you've got a possibility to flip it around while you're installing it, the deck boards will most probably cup because of differential shrinkages, and it will form a gutter. So in order not to have it, try to have the groove rings in a smiling face at you. So this will cause cupping to be convex, and the water will encourage water runoff from your deck board. Okay, railings. So deck, according to SANS, if you have a deck higher than 600, you must have railings in it. The railing must be 100 centimeters long or meter. The aperture mustn't be bigger than 100 millimeter. So some examples of railing. This is a low deck. So this is a deck that our class built in 2006, I think. They were very proud of their railing infill, and looks very traditional, but it's not. It won't be allowed on a high deck. So here's a vertical batten infill railing, and here's cabling. I heard the other day that some municipalities don't allow cabling anymore. There's been some incidences. So just make sure of your municipality if they will allow stainless steel cabling. Okay, railing construction. So if you need a post, it's nice to have a post of 76 by 76. It's quite a difficult one to get to. So you must probably have to order it specifically. And then if you want to have a railing without any holes or screws from the top, you're going to have to screw it from the bottom or from the side. So this U-shaped system works quite nice. So you create your own channel and then you bolt it from the sides, or you can have a T bracket type of thing where you've got a batten that you fixed to the posts, and then you screw it from the bottom. So on deck ceilings, there are many different sealers available, and the water-based sealers are becoming more and more popular. And also easy to apply, easy to clean the brush, and so forth. And there are different colors. The darker ones are better for UV blocking, although if it's too dark, the deck might become too hot for bare feet. And you need to put a minimum of 3 coats and also keep the seal. So you have to look at the condition of it, and you can reseal it again. You just need to key it. And this is our students busy sealing a deck. This is treated pine, and they're putting a water-based solvent on it, a water-based sealer on it, sorry. And it's a light brown color, which has got pigment in it that's got UV blockers in it. So the clear ones don't have a lot of UV blockers, so they tend to crack quicker. and the darker ones have the best UV protection. So you can put it up with a brush or a roller, and this deck here was left for too long, so the maintenance wasn't done properly, and it started flaking and cracking and trapping water, and it wasn't good. So we had to go and scrape and sand all the flakiness off and reseal it again, but it ended up actually coming out quite nice. So it is possible to repair a deck to a certain extent. So just my conclusion is timber decks can be an asset to the building, especially in our nice weather in South Africa. We need to address some key issues and don't fall in pitfalls. And if you just follow basic principles, you can increase the deck serviceability and result in a sturdy deck. So there's more detail. Sorry, I rushed through a lot of stuff here. So more detail on the Wood app. So if you want to have more information on that, go visit the Wood app and enroll for that course. All right, thank you. Any questions?
Wow. Thank you, Barry. I'll definitely think of all these things when I'm lying on a sun lounger on a nice timber deck. So thank you so much. I'm sure the architects and engineers on the webinar will find that very interesting. There are one or two questions in the chat, but I see they are being answered. And there are one or two. Let me just check the Q&A. Is loading. Firstly, apologies. When I was speaking earlier, I had my paper notes resting on my computer and there was lots of rustling and background sound, so apologies for that. There is a question here from Ans Wolfart. Does Barry have design material available that we can use for the design and spreadsheet? Is that something that is available for use? Barry?
Well, I don't know what is he referring to. I can. Is my presentation still available there?
Yes, it is. You just.
I'm just going to the top there. Sorry.
That's fine.
So if he's referring to the Excel sheet, I can share it with him. It's it's not rocket science, but if he emails me, I can share this sheet with him. He can upload his stuff and it will kick out different costs. So yes, it's available.
So Aaron, or anybody who isn't needing that, you can drop us an email using the email that you would have received when we invited you. Johan is asking the best sealer for hardwood bamboo decking, water or oil based?
Well, it's a good question to ask somebody else.
Not your specialty.
No, I've never worked with that stuff, so I'm not in the space to comment on it. So he's going to have to talk to some of the specialists. I don't know if there's specialists in wood sealers on this group, but that might be a good question to ask a specialist.
Johan, you might want to reach out to the Wood Preservers Association of South Africa, although we're all about wood, not bamboo. So, but thank you, y'all. Please reach out to us again if you have more questions. And then Graham Lee is asking, is it not better to seal decking members all around before fixing? And this would stop the warping.
Yes, it is better, especially where the joist meets the bearer on that bearing point, and also where the floorboard meets the joist. So we do find there's water ingress there, and this is where we get the most of the D grade. For warping, eventually water is going to find its way in the timber. You can't seal it 100%, so it will suck up water eventually, and it will want to warp if it is warped. But it will retard the water ingress. So yes, it is most probably better to seal it all around. So if you got money and availability and to seal it beforehand, it is better.
Okay.
Maybe just to
Yeah.
note there, Rotoblas also and other companies, they make a tape that you put onto your joist, or you can paint a bitumen on that before you put on your decking boards. That also helps a bit. It won't help for warpage, but it will help for longevity.
Okay, and then we'll do a few more questions. Vukosi Baloy is asking, what's the best area to apply timber decking and pole construction? Is it inland or coastal? I imagine both, but if you could answer that, and maybe even Richard could come in if he needs to.
Okay, before Richard comes in, I would agree. I think a deck is fantastic anywhere, coastal or inland. We find quite a lot of decks at the coastal areas just because of steep slopes towards the sea. So a lot of timber frame buildings are on the coast, built on poles, because it must probably be a more economical way to build. And because if you got that, it's easier just to build a deck onto that, a timber deck. But there's no reason why we don't do timber decks inland.
Thanks.
And I know, Richard, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, and maybe if the deck is close to the ground inland where there's more termites, could be you have to check for the termites. So the termites don't build up their nest up to the timber if the timber is untreated. If it is a hardwood timber, untreated hardwood, then the termites can cause damage there. In terms of pole constructions, coastal or inland, doesn't matter really. No, it's not.
Thanks, gents. And then Ken Lever asks, Barry, do all the decking rules and codes apply to side cladding as well?
Do all the decking rules apply to cladding? Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, do all the decking rules and codes apply to the cladding as well?
So cladding, as I understand it, is a vertical elements on the side of a building. So I would say what the specs that we were looking on spans and spacings doesn't apply to cladding, because unless you Spider-Man, we're not going to walk on the side of a building. So, but what the most probably the treatment, the hazard class treatment concerns, it is the same. So you need, if it's outside, you need to be H3 treated, if it's pine treated timber.
Thank you. And Justin asks, well, I think you mentioned sealer tape. Would you recommend sealer tape between joists and deck planks?
Yes, I would definitely recommend it, and I'm actually sorry I didn't put it into my presentation, because I think it's not everybody does it, but the people who do it, they find very good results from it. And it doesn't have to be tape. Tapes are quite expensive sometimes. You can just take bitumen paint as well and paint that. It's a bit more messy and sticky, but it's more economical. If you got access to funds, the tapes are very good.
Thank you. And then Michael Kloos has two questions. I'll ask the first one. What are the advantages and disadvantages of water and solvent-based surface treatments?
Well, again, it's slightly outside of my scope. Sealants is not really one of my strong points, but the conversations that I had with suppliers and my experience is that the water-based ones are just easy to apply. It's your brushes can be cleaned easy. You're not sitting with solvents that are in contact with you and the personnel working with the solvents. And the water-based ones these days, 20 years ago, everybody frowned when you say water-based, but even cars these days, VW in Uitenhage are using water-based paints for their vehicles. So there's definitely new technology on this water-based stuff. I'm not sure about the penetration of water-based and solvent-based on hardwoods and softwoods. So I'm not sure of that. I think, Richard, you know a bit better on the penetration, on the gluing of softwoods and hardwoods versus water and solvent-based.
Just as a rule of thumb, water-based on softwoods and solvent-based on hardwoods. That is a general rule of thumb that's being applied. However, you get now also primers that is used on water-based that works very, very good. But yeah, there's such a lot of stuff on the market. I'm not sure. There was a question. Is it Ken Necklace?
Ken Lever.
Ken Lever.
Yes.
The other one was in terms of a stump or a cut end application of creosote, if there's a more environmental friendly thing available. Creosote is pretty much, yes, it stings like hell, but it's surprisingly environmental friendly. It was used in hospitals in the past as a sterilizing agent, and it was used on people, and nobody had any harm on that. Yes, it stinks. Obviously, in over amount of quantities, it can have an influence. But just to cover the odd end, you're fine. It's pretty harmless on small applications.
Thanks. Thanks, Richard and Barry. I'm going to just take one more because we are running out of time. In fact, we are out of time, we need to close. And I'm not sure if you covered this, but Ayabonga says, Barry, in your opinion, what's more important, the timber one chooses or the way it is maintained? Short answer.
Ayabonga, what a nice question. So I would say if you choose an extremely durable timber, you must probably don't have to maintain it. So if you put your money deep in your pocket and get one of these high density South American hardwoods and you properly install it, you can most probably not maintain it that good. But if you have pine, that is most probably cheaper, H3 CCA treated pine, you must probably have to maintain it if it's in the sun every year. You're going to put a sealer onto it. So I think both has its advantages and disadvantages, but good question. I'm not sure. It depends if you got if you're a maintenance type of guy and you like to do that type of maintenance. I think the pine will last you long, and so yes, I hope it answers your question.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah, I just see there's a few more comments, but we are running out of time. And just the last one is Philip saying, correction, creosote is known to be carcinogenic. So I definitely think we're going to have to get some wood preserving experts on again. We have had a webinar where we have done that before, but if you do have any questions just around preservation and the right materials, you can reach out to the South African Wood Preservers Association. Bruce Breert heads that up. So yeah, I think I'd really like, I'm sorry we can't take all your questions, but again, if you have burning questions, please email them to us and we will pass them on to Barry and Richard or whoever we can. I just last a few things, there are some polls that Ferdinand might have to post the links again. We really appreciate your feedback on these webinars, and so there are some polls that we'd like you to complete, and yeah, thank you for your interaction. Really always fascinating to hear more about wood and the way it can benefit our lives. And obviously it's renewable, it's recyclable, and it's a lot of it. The pine and eucalyptus is grown in South Africa. So we obviously want to support local industry. Roy Southey from the Sawmilling South Africa, the executive director thereof, is just going to give us a few closing remarks. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sam, and thank you to Barry and Richard. So yeah, all there is for me to say from the sawmilling industry, and one of the starters of these webinars. Thank you to the presenters. Thank you to Sam for your hard work, Ferdinand for his hard work, and thank you to the people in the audience. It's wonderful to see that it's growing. We're getting through to you, and our whole message, as July pointed out, is to try and spread the word about the good facts about timber. Although listening to Richard, I felt it was a little bit like listening to Davy Rood's talks, full of very accurate data, but made you want to go away and slit your wrists. But it's not all bad news. I think there are obviously plus and minus factors when using timber, and you need all to be made aware of that. So thank you, Barry, for pointing all those things out to us, and also to Richard. To the rest of you, thanks very much. The only thing I'd like to leave you with is that most of the questions that have been asked will be answered if you go to the Wood app. So if you go onto our website and you register for the Wood app, or you download the Wood app, and you'd like to know a bit more about deck building, you'd like to know more about timber grading, you'd like to know more about anything wood-wise, there are many very constructive courses on the Wood app, and we encourage you all to visit that site and to educate yourselves on timber matters. So other than that, just thanks to Sam for putting this all together, and see you guys next time.